Two people wake up on a Tuesday morning. The first one checks their bank account before their feet touch the floor, not because they want to, because it's a reflex now, the way you probe a sore tooth with your tongue. The number is fine, technically, but fine in the way that means one unexpected bill away from not fine. They have a 10 a.m. performance review with a manager who has never given feedback they describe as useful. They'll sit through it smiling because the rent is due Thursday, and smiling is cheaper than honesty. The second person wakes up, checks the weather, and decides to take a walk before opening their laptop. They work. They're not retired. They're not living off a trust fund. But money is no longer the invisible fence that determines every decision they make. When something breaks, they fix it. When a job stops working, they leave it. They say no when they mean no. This isn't a story about the rich versus everyone else. It's about a specific threshold, a point where money stops making your decisions for you. Today, we're going to look at what that threshold actually is, how to calculate your own version of it, and the things that happen after you get there that nobody in financial media is honest about. Most people living under financial pressure have stopped noticing how much it costs them beyond money. Let's follow a household. Two people, both working. She's an operations manager earning $72,000. He's in marketing at $65,000. Combined, $137,000 a year. Well above median. On paper, they should be comfortable. After federal and state taxes, FICA, and a minimum 401k contribution to get the employer match, they take home roughly $8,100 a month. Mortgage on a house they bought 2 years ago, not extravagant, $410,000 with a decent rate, $2,380 a month. Property taxes and homeowners insurance, $580. They're at $2,960 before they've eaten anything. 2 cars, nothing is accessible without them. Combined payments, $590. Insurance for both, $295. Gas, $310. That's $1,195 in transportation. We're now at $4,155. Student loans, both needed degrees to qualify for these jobs, $560 combined. Health insurance premiums their employers don't fully cover, $370. Groceries, $720. Utilities, internet, 2 phone plans, $410. Total fixed costs are $6,215. Money remaining, $1,885. Out of that $1,885, they still need to cover clothing, car maintenance, home repairs, medical copays, gifts, the occasional dinner out, and any emergency that arrives without checking their schedule first. They're not irresponsible. They didn't buy anything outrageous. They made a reasonable decisions at every step and arrived at a life where one transmission repair becomes a credit card balance and one layoff becomes a genuine crisis. Here's the part that should make you angry on their behalf. Research on financial stress found that chronic money anxiety reduces cognitive capacity by roughly the equivalent of 14 IQ points, the same effect as losing a full night of sleep. So the person lying awake at 2 a.m. trying to think through their financial situation is doing so at the precise moment they're least capable of solving it. The stress impairs the thinking required to escape the stress. That's not an accident. It's the environment these households are operating in, and it's worth naming clearly before we talk about getting out of it. Let me give you the honest version of financial freedom, because the internet version, laptop on a beach, passive income, never work again, does a remarkable job of selling a feeling while describing almost nothing useful. The initial experience of reaching financial independence, according to people who've actually done it, is briefly euphoric, and then something quieter settles in. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation. Your brain recalibrates to the new normal, and the excitement fades. What doesn't fade is the absence of dread. That constant low-frequency calculation running in the background of your mind, can I afford this? What if this breaks? What if I lose the job? Goes quiet. And you don't fully realize how loud it was until it stops. The day-to-day changes are mundane in the best possible way. When you have 3 months of expenses saved, you can say no to something unreasonable at work without spiraling. When you have several years of expenses invested, you can walk away entirely if something stops working. A car repair is annoying instead of catastrophic. A slow month is uncomfortable instead of terrifying. These aren't dramatic transformations. They're the removal of friction that most people have been carrying so long they've stopped noticing its weight. But here's what most financial content skips, and I want to be direct about this because these things will catch you off guard if no one mentions them. The first is identity. When financial pressure is removed, people discover very quickly whether they had a life outside of work or whether work was providing structure, community, and purpose that they'd never had to consciously build. The money problem being solved doesn't automatically solve the life question. The second is what researchers call de-accumulation anxiety. After years of conditioning yourself to save and protect the number, spending it down feels wrong, even when the math says it's completely sustainable. Studies suggest that a significant percentage of retirees describe spending their savings as psychologically difficult. You built the discipline to accumulate. That discipline doesn't automatically hand the controls to the version of you that gets to enjoy it. Knowing these things in advance doesn't prevent them, but it means you can build a life alongside the money, not just a portfolio. Here's the number you actually need, and it's more calculable than most people realize. The foundation is something called the 4% rule, developed by researcher William Bengen in 1994. He back-tested every 30-year retirement period going back to 1926 and found that a broadly diversified portfolio could sustain withdrawals of 4% annually, adjusted for inflation, and survived 95% of those historical periods. The math: multiply your annual expenses by 25. That's your freedom number. If you spend $40,000 a year, you need $1 million. If you spend $55,000 a year, you need $1.375 million. If you spend $70,000 a year, you need $1.75 million. No yachts, no private jets. A $1 million portfolio at 4% gives you $40,000 a year. Comfortable, not glamorous, but money is no longer making your decisions, which is the actual point. Now here's the thing most people get completely backwards. The single most important variable in how quickly you reach that number is not your income, it's your savings rate. At a 10% savings rate, where most people feel genuinely responsible about money, you're roughly 50 years from financial independence. Starting at 25, you finish at 75. You've technically done everything right and spent your entire working life doing it. At 20%, you shave off over a decade. At 30%, you're around 28 years out. Hit 50%, spend half, save half, and you're approximately 17 years from never being financially coerced again. At higher rates, achieved through genuinely modest living or high income, the timeline compresses dramatically. Here's the compounding insight most people miss. Reducing spending does two things simultaneously. It increases your savings rate, which accelerates the timeline, and it reduces your freedom number because a lower-cost lifestyle requires a smaller portfolio to sustain it. Someone earning $75,000 and spending $35,000 is in a dramatically better position than someone earning $180,000 and spending $170,000. The math doesn't care about income, it cares about the gap. There's also a useful intermediate target called Coast FI, the point at which you've invested enough that compound growth alone, without another dollar contributed, will carry you to full financial independence by traditional retirement age. A 32-year-old with $280,000 invested at 7% real returns reaches approximately $1.2 million by 60 without saving another cent. The retirement problem is solved. They can downshift, change careers, work on something they actually find meaningful. The pressure releases long before they've reached the full number. Compounding is the part of this conversation that always sounds like a cliche until you actually watch it happen in the numbers. Invest $10,000 a year at 7% annual returns. Your first $100,000 takes about 8 years, and nearly 90% of it is money you personally put in. The market barely helped. But at $500,000, your portfolio is generating roughly $35,000 a year on its own. At $1 million, it's generating more than the median American household earns from full-time work. And it does this every year, whether you're paying attention or not. The second $100,000 takes about 5 years. The third takes 4. The acceleration is real, and it's inexorable. It doesn't respond to market news or your emotional state. It just compounds. This is why the first phase is the hardest and the least rewarding. You're doing most of the lifting yourself, and the returns feel small. The people who stop in this phase, and many do, never find out what the machine feels like when it starts carrying the load. A Vermont janitor named Ronald Reeb died in 2014 at 92 and left behind an $8 million estate. He lived modestly, drove used cars, stayed in the same house for decades. He invested consistently in dividend stocks and index funds, never touched the principal, and never did anything complicated. The people around him, including his own family, had no idea. He didn't outperform anyone. He just never stopped doing the simple thing, and he never touched it. Here's something the financial independence community doesn't advertise. A significant percentage of people who reach their freedom number don't stop working. They keep going, not because they have to, but because the number they thought would feel like enough doesn't quite feel like enough. You reach $1 million and think 1.3 million would feel safer. You reach 1.3 million and think 1.6 million. The goalposts have legs, and they've been moving the whole time. The writer Morgan Housel describes this as one of the hardest financial skills, getting the goalposts to stop moving. It doesn't happen automatically because the mindset that builds the portfolio doesn't automatically know when to hand control over to the person who gets to live. The way out is to stop treating financial independence as a finish line and start treating it as a gate, one that unlocks choices rather than ending obligations. Most people who reach it continue working, just differently. They take projects they interest them, they set their own hours, they say no to the things they always said yes to out of financial obligation. The work doesn't disappear, the coercion does. None of this matters without a concrete path. Here's one. First, build a cash buffer. Start with $1,000 in a high-yield savings account, then grow it to 3 to 6 months of actual expenses. This isn't investing, it's insulation. More than half of Americans can't absorb a $1,000 surprise without going into debt. Having a buffer doesn't just protect you financially, it changes how you make decisions. You stop operating from scarcity the moment you have a cushion. That cognitive shift is real and it matters. Second, eliminate high-interest debt. Credit card APRs are averaging over 22% right now. Every dollar of that debt is costing you more in guaranteed interest than any realistic investment return. Paying off a 22% card is the mathematical equivalent of a guaranteed 22% return, tax-free. There's no portfolio strategy that competes with it. Do this before you invest aggressively in anything else. Third, invest in broad market index funds through tax-advantaged accounts, not individual stocks, not whatever is generating excitement this week. The S&P 500 has returned roughly 10% annually going back nearly a century. Low-cost index funds replicate that return at near zero fees. Automate contributions on payday. Do not check the balance when markets drop. Leave it alone and let it compound. Fourth, keep lifestyle flat when income increases. Every raise invested instead of spent does double work. It adds to the portfolio and keeps your freedom number from growing. The households that never escape the treadmill aren't there because they didn't earn enough. They're there because every income increase was immediately followed by an equal lifestyle upgrade. New income in, new expenses out, same savings rate, same timeline, just a nicer version of the same constraint. Fifth, and most underrated, build a life you actually want at your current level. The people who get to financial independence fastest are usually the ones who figured out that the things they care most about, time, relationships, health, meaningful work, don't cost nearly as much as the things they were spending money on to feel like they were living well. The two people from the beginning of this video aren't separated by luck or dramatically different incomes. They're separated by a structure, a deliberate gap between income and spending, maintained over time, invested in something that compounds. The math is available to almost everyone: a savings rate, a freedom number, compounding that doesn't need your help, only your patience. The first $100,000 is the hardest. Everything after that is mostly leaving it alone. The question is whether you're willing to run the numbers honestly, with the actual figures from your actual life, instead of the version that feels more comfortable in the short term. Subscribe if this shifted something. Next, the exact order of financial moves: when to save, when to invest, when to pay debt, and why getting the sequence wrong costs more than most people realize.